Donald Trump pulled from the UN Human Rights Council and trashed it. This was done under the banner of the United States. Do you guys know why they did that? They did that because they was upset because the UN Human Rights Council was calling out Israel for their war crimes. So then there was a headline that came out, and this last thing I'm going to share, and I'm going to get Zoya and Peter in here. There was a headline that came out around the time when Biden became president, where he said, and he promised this on the campaign trail as well, if I win the office of presidency, we're going to rejoin the Human Rights Council, the UN Human Rights Council, and everybody, including the neo-progressives, who we continue to call out, they praised Biden for this. See, this is why we should have Biden, the return of normalcy, a cool head in office over Donald Trump, because he's willing to respect human rights. He want to get back to the UN Human Rights Council. And you want to know what's very interesting about that? And I covered this at the time. Yeah, I'm gonna show you guys my tweet. You guys know why Biden rejoined the UN Human Rights Council? Him and Anthony Blinken was very open about this. Listen to this part. As the United States re-engages, we urge the Human Rights Council to look at how it conducts its business. That includes a disproportionate focus on Israel. So you guys realize Trump got a ton of heat for pulling out of the UN Human Rights Council because and he cited how they treated Israel as the reason why he did that. Then Biden was like, no, that's not the right response. We did get back in the UN Human Rights Council. So the UN returned to the rights body. Look at this article. This is from Reuters. To shield Israel. So they agreed with Trump. They just thought Trump had the wrong strategy. You guys see here, this is maybe a year and a half, 2 years ago. I did a segment looking much younger, much fresher. This is before this profession aged me significantly. I was covering the corruption between Biden, Israel, and how they've been undermining international law even before October 7th, because I cannot emphasize enough, this is before October 7th. Before this entire genocide, you had probes investigating Israeli war crimes. And we're going to cover this story later because this completely contradicts the entire idea that the conflict started on October 7th. Because Zionists and Israel supporters, they will say, well, we are allowed to slaughter civilians, commit massacres and people hiding in tents, violate international law because this is a war that Hamas and the Palestinians started. Well, that is completely contradicted when you realize that the ICC have been probing into Israeli war crimes since 2021. I covered that. I covered how the Biden administration infiltrated the UN and these human rights organizations in order to protect and shield Israel, as I just covered in the clip I showed you in the intro video. So the sweet summer children, they are surprised that Biden is handling Gaza the way he has. They simply are the people who wasn't paying attention. You had Biden that openly said that we are joining the UN Human Rights Council to shield and protect Israel. And that is literally exactly what they did. And guys, these are things that they were saying on the lead up of the election that they was going to do. You guys see how Biden and liberals, they are the more competent side of the establishment. You had Trump and them, they just pulled out altogether. They're like, man, this is ridiculous. You guys are so unfair to Israel. Let's pull out. The liberals like, bro, what? That's not how we handle this. What we do is we infiltrate and we manipulate the ICC, as I showed there. You see how the liberal side, they're more competent. And now you have this slaughter in Rafah. And this is why I was telling people not to get too excited with these ICJ and ICCs. Because the people who are pacifists, the people who usually condemn Palestinian resistance, they always overblew what the ICC and ICJ was doing. And I will say overall it's a good thing to have these diplomatic victories. But my response was that the ICC, the ICJ, they're not saving Palestinians right now. What enforcement mechanisms do they have to stop the genocidal state of Israel? We're seeing international law fail the Palestinians on a mass scale. My first reaction when I heard the ICC charge was like, okay, how are we going to stop the genocide of Palestinian people right now? And then you had the International Court of Justice that sent an order out so Israel would not continue their offensive and slaughter Palestinians in Rafah. So what do they do in response? Israel bombs Rafah 60 times in 2 days after receiving that court order. So this is something that I mentioned because we are talking about how to actually prevent the genocide. The people who was trying to pretend that the ICJ and ICC is mechanisms to save Palestinians got it all wrong. That's why there was people in Gaza that was not celebrating when the ICC and the ICJ ruled because they're like, all right, we're still fucked though. We're still screwed. And we are seeing it on the mass level because of U.S. veto power. How international law fails us. We have a rogue bad actor that is sponsored and supported by the largest, most violent empire in human history. How international law, which, as I said before, international law itself is on trial as much as Israel is. And the ICJ and the ICC and the international institutions, their inability to prevent such a thing from happening shows that we shouldn't rely on them. It shows the failure. You even had senior officials that openly admit that the ICC wasn't meant to go after Africa, the thugs in Africa and Putin. Now, once again, there is nuance in all these arguments because obviously it's much preferred to have these rulings and ICC and ICJ go after them. But this is why the professional managerial class, the people on the right in the Palestinian movements who are revolutionary Palestinian brothers and sisters called out the centrist wing of the Palestinian resistance, the people who condemn Hamas. They condemn Hamas, they condemn Hezbollah, they condemn Ansarullah. Even the worst among them, I won't pretend that it's a significant amount of them, but the worst among them, I'm talking about like the progressives, like Bernie Sanders and them, they would condemn BDS, even boycotting. They say, oh, we can't boycott Israel. That's a form of anti-Semitism. There's centrist wing of the Palestinian resistance movement that are there to keep their eyes on the radical revolutionary side that actually want to engage against our colonial oppressors. This is what our friends at the Palestinian Community Network explained to us. They said they are as upset. I had a Palestinian roundtable that I hosted a few weeks ago because once again, it's my job as a citizen journalist to talk to those people and explain to you guys the material reality that we are living under. That's my job as a citizen journalist. And when you talk to the revolutionary Palestinians, there's so much frustration with the centrist wing of the Palestinian resistance who condemn Palestinian resistance because they have this delusion. They are delusional in thinking that the institutions that was established today are designed to resist Israeli apartheid. And let me repeat that. The reason why you see the professional managerial class and the Palestinian centrists once again, I like these people. They are on the good side. They are on the right side of this issue, but they condemn boycott sometimes. They condemn Hamas because they view the current institutional powers at play as enough to resist the apartheid genocidal state of Israel, which is what Hamas and what I am saying, what many Palestinian resistance fighters acknowledge as not being sufficient. The same way that the institutions that was being upheld during the civil rights movement was not sufficient. We needed mass protests, and we need an armed wing of the civil rights movement that a lot of white Americans like to forget exists. Because what happened to this red line? Biden warns Netanyahu an assault on Rafah will cross red line. Now you have Israel that burned children alive. And now you guys see, the only thing I can really show you guys is mainstream media headlines. I can't even begin to show you guys the absolutely horrific images that I've been purposely avoiding as well for my mental health, because it's literally the most disgusting, horrific thing you will ever see. What Israel just did in Rafah, murdering dozens of innocent civilians. In the narrative, they claim they got 2 Hamas resistance fighters. So in order to get 2 Hamas resistance fighters, they was willing to burn children alive. And apparently, I don't have details on this, there was another tent massacre that I saw reported a few hours ago. As we speak right now, there are tent massacres going on as Israel bombards and destroys Rafah under the false guise that they're going after Hamas. They are not going after Hamas. For one, there is no evidence that 2 Hamas resistance fighters was killed in this strike. Because as I explained before, what Israel and the United States do, they take any military-aged men, which starts at the age of around 12 for Palestinians. So I guess when they say 2 Hamas militants was murdered, that's essentially we killed 2 men over 2 boys over the age of 12, maybe some men over the age of 21 that was involved. Because once again, I cannot stress enough, there is never any evidence of the Israeli claims that they went after and killed Hamas. And now the images that we're seeing, which I can't show you guys, which you guys probably shouldn't see, they're being spread all over the world. And now there's even suggestions, and I'm kind of at the point right now where I believe it when I see it. I believe it when I see it, because now you have the EU floating sanctions on Israel. Let me pull this one up as well. I show Politico. EU foreign ministers discuss sanctions against Israel. For the first time at an EU meeting, in a real way, I've seen significant discussions on sanctions. And this is what the Irish foreign minister is talking about, because this is in direct response to Israel ignoring an ICJ court order forbidding them to go into Rafah. So after they was forbidden to go into Rafah by court order, you then had Israel that say, oh no, we're going to do it anyway because international law is not real. And for the people that's saying that Biden has nothing to do with this, they couldn't be more incorrect. The most bad faith people in the world are often the progressives, the media signs, all these people that say, oh man, come on, what can Biden really do? There are a lot of people that say, oh man, what can Biden really do about this? I think this is a big narrative that's coming out. So when the Biden administration comes out and they speak out against the ICJ, that is Biden giving Israel permission to ignore the ICJ's order on not invading Rafah. So Joe Biden is directly complicit with this, my friends. So Biden, Blinken, and the Biden State Department immediately after the ICJ, after the ICC put out their arrest warrants, after the ICJ warned Israel, they said they don't have jurisdiction over Israel. That is what the Biden administration rushed out to say. So when saying that gave the permission structure, that was the Biden administration giving a wink and a nod to Israel to engage in activity into Rafah. Dumbasses in the corporate media, They will never. Their narrative, which is done on purpose because they're not really that dumb, they're spinning what Netanyahu's doing as tanking the Biden administration.
Our top story this.
So I'm gonna show you guys this segment here. I'm gonna try to get into this as much as I can before our guests get here, because this striking to Rafa with EU talking about sanctions, because they are avoiding this. They are trying to talk about the Trump trials and all this in Western media. I've been analyzing a lot of the reactions here, but trust me, this is being blasted everywhere throughout the world. I saw a speech with Lula. Let me see if I can find it because I didn't save it. We have Lula saying that, man, we got to do something about the genocide in Gaza, because if we don't, we're next. So look, here's our friends and sisters, our brothers and sisters at Hotspot. You know, they always provide. Here's Lula. If we stay silent on genocide, we're next. Israel keeps killing women and children. We can't remain silent. We can't fail to be supportive, because tomorrow we'll need that solidarity. And guys, there's the international community is horrified about what they're seeing. We are in a unique bubble. We're gonna see how the West is trying to cope with this. That is not the reality the rest of the world is going through right now. In fact, I saw Man City. You guys know I'm a big fan of European soccer. My brother, he's a big fan of Manchester City, and their coach declined. Let me see if I can find it. I didn't have to save. Actually, I think this is important to make my point. Manchester City, Israel. Because Israel is about becoming the pariah. They already was, but it's about to be even worse. Damn it, I can't find it. Where the Manchester City ignored the Israeli representative. Oh well, fuck. I might find it as I let this next segment play. The Israel and Zionists, like, bro, the way they're playing this is unbelievable. This slaughter that we've seen in Rafah, the world is not going to forgive this. So let's see how Morning Joe and these unhinged Zionists, how coping with this. Let's dive into this because we got a lot to say.
Hour, Israel is facing widespread international condemnation for striking a tent camp that was housing displaced Palestinians in Rafah. According to the Gaza Health Ministry, at least 45 people were killed in Sunday's airstrike. That was the deadliest incident in southern Gaza City since Israel began its offensive there earlier this month. The IDF claims 2 Hamas militants were killed in the attack, and that many measures were taken beforehand to minimize harm to civilians.
That's them reading pure IDF propaganda, by the way. Why are they even repeating the Israeli claim that they're here to be careful, we killed Hamas militants? That's them directly reading IDF propaganda, but let's continue.
Now, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is calling the strike a tragic incident. He made the comment while addressing Parliament yesterday, saying there will be an investigation. Meanwhile, 2 U.S. officials tell Axios the Biden administration is looking into whether the attack violates the president's red line. Earlier this month, Biden threatened to suspend the delivery of some weapons if Israel entered population centers in Rafah.
Obviously, there has been this conflict. I do think it is important for us to note here that, again, we've talked about the United States and the kill ratio of enemy combatants to civilians. And you certainly could look at us and any other major country that's fought wars, and you'd be hard pressed to say that Israel has a higher rate of civilian casualties.
Bro, why do they keep making this argument like this is a good argument? My brother, actually, you're not my brother. What they're saying is, man, if you look at how many people that we killed, if you look at how ineffective our military is, can we really judge Israel? Bro, they keep making this argument, and it is not the banger that they think it is. Come on, man. We evil as shit, man. We done so many war crimes. We can't judge Israel. Who's we, for one? Secondly, the fact that Israel in this campaign, you guys know they killed more children in this conflict than all war zones over the last 5 years combined. This thing that they're doing where they're pretending this is a normal war, this is not normal at all. This is Cambodia level of indiscriminate bombing. We are seeing historic level of slaughter. And then what Joe Scarborough and what Zionist neocons, what they're saying is through the historical slaughter and through this heinous genocide where Israel is violating international law, we don't have the moral high ground over them. What does that say about the United States, my friends? And what does it say about your values that you don't condemn this reality, in fact? Zionists say, oh, my, you guys see that you dropped nuclear bombs after Pearl Harbor. After 9/11, you guys said torture camps. This is not the argument you guys think it is. You guys are essentially admitting the claim that I keep making, that the United States and Israel are the current and modern axis of evil, committing crimes on the scale that no one can compete with. That's why it's absurd to live in this violent empire and spend your time condemning Xi Jinping and Putin. Putin kill count is child's play compared to Netanyahu. Putin's kill count, even with the Ukraine war, it's child's play compared to Barack Obama, Hillary Clinton, Madeleine Albright. I'm not saying these places and these governments are perfect, but the United States and Israel has the moral high ground over nobody, as admitted by Joe Scarborough here during this unhinged. I don't even know the point he's even trying to make here. This is the moment where I decided I'm going to cover this because I want to play his point in full. And this is not the banger he thinks it is.
For us,
it's almost like he's trying to prove our point. So I'm going to let this play again. I want to emphasize this point because this is him proving every single RBN segment right with what he's saying here. And they are so brainwashed, they don't even realize how what they're saying and how insane this is.
This conflict, I do think it is important for us to note here that, again, we've talked about the United States and the kill ratio of enemy combatants to civilians. And you certainly could look at us and any other major country that's fought wars, and you'd be hard pressed to say that Israel has a higher rate of civilian casualties to enemy combatants than the United States. And I remember back that Peter Baker, drone strikes going after al-Qaeda time and again, whether it was killing most of Zawahiri's family while he escaped, whether it was killing Americans in drones.
Bro, this guy who worships the military is just acknowledging casually to his audience that we've been targeting and killing civilians, and including American citizens. How does this not change your entire worldview after knowing this stuff? Like, just casually acknowledging, like, yeah, man, our military, man, if you look at us, we kill people all the time. We do all the crazy stuff. Why are we judging Israel? This is an insane argument for someone to make who consider themselves who love and acknowledge and worship the United States and their military. It's insane. Let's continue.
Baker, drone strikes going after al-Qaeda time and again, whether it was killing most of Zawahiri's family while he escaped, whether it was killing Americans in drone strikes, certainly not justifying what's going on in Rafah. And yes, I understand there is a red line there. I am just making sure we're not hypocritical, suggesting that somehow what Israel is doing in warfare is different than what every other country does in warfare.
No, sir. No, sir. No, sir. No, sir. You're not allowed to do this. Why are you using we? We're not the one making policy. We're the ones who are captured And we are the ones who are forced to pay for this empire. We are the one who's been critical of these policies that you're talking about. So don't throw us into bin like you guys. He's like, how can we talk about how genocidal the Israeli people? No, what do you mean? This is what we've been calling out for day one. This is what we've been calling out from day one. And the fact that Israeli and United States war crime are unique. He's like, oh, come on, man. We don't want to sound hypocritical because, I'm a war criminal. I support war criminals. You support war criminals. We all support war criminals. Yes, you are hypocritical. We are not. We are the true patriots because we want to make sure our country is not a hypocritical garbage nation that supports terrorism. And that's where these people's ideology is completely destroyed because they view people who protest against our state as unpatriotic. No, we are the patriotic ones who are trying to set our nation correct. You okay with our country being filled with child murderers, with violently hypocritical criminals? Oh, Jesus Christ, let's continue this. This is ridiculous.
And Rafa, and I understand there is a red line there. I am just making sure we're not hypocritical, suggesting that somehow what Israel is doing in warfare is different than what every other country does in warfare. That said, this obviously has to amp up tensions between Joe Biden.
Right, sorry, just one more interruption. I just want to say, and I bring this up all the time, more children was killed in Israel's operation in like the first week than all the children combined in the Ukraine conflict. So he's trying to say that, oh, well, Israel fight war no differently than any other country. You know, the country that you guys say you guys said that Russia was genocidal. You guys said that Putin was a unique criminal for what he did in Ukraine. Meanwhile, the amount of civilians and children that he's killed is completely dwarfed by Israel. It's not even a comparison. What Russia is doing to Ukraine is a glorified pickle contest compared to what the slaughter Israel is doing to the Palestinians.
And Benjamin Netanyahu, does it not?
Yeah, it certainly does, obviously. And it doesn't come at a good time for Prime Minister Netanyahu, who's certainly not going to convince the International Court, which is considering whether to issue arrest warrants for war crimes, that Israel is, in fact, exercising restraint in the way that the International Court would like it to do. And
What? That was a word salad if I ever heard one. He's like, man, this is not convenient for Israel, who's under investigation for international court. What do you mean it's not convenient for Israel? You mean it's not convenient that they committed war crimes while they're under investigation for committing war crimes? Yes, that's kind of inconvenient. It's kind of inconvenient for your Zionism and your support of Israel, for Israel to commit war crimes when they're under investigation. Yeah, that's kind of inconvenient. If I was under investigations for stealing Skittles, and then I stole some Reese's, yeah, that's kind of inconvenient for my case that I'm not a fucking thief.
The Biden administration would like it to do. Now, for the Biden administration, for President Biden, the red line that he has laid down has been kind of fuzzy. We haven't really seen exactly what he means by that. What he said in general is that they don't—
Kind of fuzzy, he said. Just kind of fuzzy.
Want the Israelis to go into Rafah in a big way that would cause inordinate civilian casualties and that would keep aid from flowing to people who need it. They have said so far, up until now, that the limited strikes in Rafah have not crossed that line, that Israel has, in fact, been more restrained in the way it has approached Rafah than it had originally intended to.
They are literally burning children alive, as seen on the image on the left here. Meanwhile, the Biden administration, being reported on MSNBC as fact, is saying that Israel is being restrained. And by the way, there's another massacre that just happened that we get information about. They're committing massacres so fast we can't even keep up with it. Meanwhile, they're talking about, oh man, Israel is going into this refugee camp and burning children alive in a very cautious way. That's what they're saying.
Flag that it would. And most civilians, in fact, have left Rafah. There had been more than 1 million people taking refuge there. The belief is that the majority of those have, in fact, left at this point. But obviously, this attack on a tent of mostly civilian people, 45 dead, is the kind of thing that President Biden was talking about, the kind of thing he wanted to avoid. And whether or not Prime Minister Netanyahu—
No, it's not. That is Israeli and Biden propaganda, U.S. propaganda. How can you say that Biden and Israel wanted to avoid a massacre of refugees in a refugee camp that you ordered an attack on? That does not make sense. So when the reason why the ICJ ruled that Israel cannot go into Rafah, the reason why everyone warned that Israel can't go into Rafah is because that will lead to mass slaughter of civilians. So you can't say, oh, we're going to have a tactical military operation into this refugee camp. And then when refugees die, oh, come on, man, we didn't expect that to happen. They're saying stuff to us that inherently makes zero sense. But this is the mass genocidal psychosis and the abuse the American people are forced to put up with the amount that we are gaslighted, with the insanity that we are spoon-fed.
Netanyahu sees, has a second thoughts as a result of this. We don't know, but it's terrible timing in terms of figuring out what the American position is going to be on this sort of, limited Rafah incursion that we've seen so far. It's not limited to the people who are in that tent.
Jonathan Lemire, the images coming out of this camp are truly horrifying. Women, children, civilians, refugees, frankly, some of them incinerated in this attack. If this doesn't cross the red line, I guess the question could be asked by some, what does the red line mean? Is there really a red line? And if it in fact has been crossed in this case or will be crossed at some point in the future, what does that mean in terms of the United States' willingness to support Israel or to withdraw some of its support? What is that red line at this point?
Yeah, it has been, to Peter's point, pretty vague. And you'll recall when the president issued this warning about a red line a few weeks ago, it was about a full-on military operation in Rafah. That still hasn't happened yet.
What are you talking about? Just absurd propaganda. And I see my guest here. I'm going to introduce Danny here whenever he's ready here. Just insane propaganda saying there's no military action. So how did the refugees get murdered then? Just outright lying, saying there's no military operation. You have the Atlantic outright justifying the murdering of children. Here, look, you guys see how they're just outright reading a script? They're just reading a script sent by the IDF. There's no critical thinking here. Oh, technically, there's no military operation in this area that was killed by a military strike. And now look at how the BBC covered it, where they're essentially being held at gunpoint by the IDF and was told to read a script. This is what is considered free media in the West.
It's Monday, the 27th of May. Our main story, the Hamas-run health ministry in Gaza says 35 people have been killed and dozens injured in an explosion at a refugee camp near Rafah.
The Israel Defense Force said it had carried out an airstrike targeting a compound where senior Hamas officials had gathered. It said it is now reviewing the incident after reports that civilians had also been harmed.
Civilians been harmed? You mean the dozens that was killed? The Hamas-led health industry. The IDF claims that was going after. There's no reason to listen to what anything Israel said. And Danny, give me a thumbs up whenever you're ready. I can introduce you here very soon. There's no reason to get an IDF any reason. I think we're having connection issues. Yeah, I think we have an issue with Danny. So I'm gonna bring my guest in here very soon. Fortunately, hopefully we can go back in. I saw he disconnected a few times. But I still got plenty to show you guys because the media covering this is literally psychopathic. I can continue with the Morning Joe statement, but I'm gonna show you guys a few more. This is the Atlantic. This is the Atlantic that is literally justifying the murder of children. Because obviously I can't show you that much on YouTube, but you guys have, if you're on social media, you guys seen the horrific images. A lot of them I've been purposely trying to avoid. If you want to ruin your day, to search Rafa, for example. Look at this, what was printed in the Atlantic. Even when conducted legally, war is ugly. And then I see we were back. Danny, give me a thumbs up whenever you're ready. I know we're having probably some tech issues here. But he said it is possible. I'm gonna break you in here very soon, Danny. The Atlantic says it is possible to kill children legally if, for example, so that sentence, stop. The mass genocidal psychosis of this country cannot be overstated. We now have media in this country that is now saying it is possible to kill children legally. And they're using the IDF talking point that Hamas is hiding behind children. You know the children that Israel told to relocate to this area. So let me get back to this insanity. I want to properly introduce our guest. I'm sure you probably see some of it. You've seen the coverage of the Rafah, the massacre, but I want to properly welcome our guest, amazing political analyst, a professor. He does great work with Midwestern Marx. Thank you for joining us on the RBN Danny Show. I'm glad we were able to make this happen.
Yeah, thank you, RBN, for the invitation. I was caught up in traffic trying to get home to my office, so I just pulled over off of Route 95 to make it happen in a timely way. But yeah, what's happening in Rafa right now, what's been happening now for over 7 months is truly disgusting. And it perturbs me deeply every time they mention any statistic about the horrific casualties, the genocidal casualties in Gaza. They always have to put the Hamas-run health ministry, because for the West, for the colonial West, Palestinians have never been human. They weren't human during al-Nakba in 1948 when 750,000 Palestinians were displaced from their homes, from their communities, from their homeland. And to this day, 76 long genocidal years later, they continually are subhuman in the West. So shout out to RBN for all of the conscious raising work that you all have been doing for months and months now in defense of Palestine and their right to self-determination.
Yeah, I appreciate you, Danny. It's great to have you on. That's a great summary. And that's what got me involved in citizen journalism. I'll show you guys a clip of my early days. You guys see my old setup. This was always one of my main issues. Like, because the genocidal tendencies of Israel was obvious. This end game was obvious from the jump. It was obvious how little the West cared about the lives of Palestinians. And that's why you have the way, and I'm going to show you guys some examples of the way that Palestinians are being dehumanized. Even now, I'm going to show you guys this statement from AIPAC, for example. Talk about how in the response to this slaughter that we've seen in Rafah, AIPAC says, the images coming out of Rafah tonight are horrific. It's a terrible tragedy as a result of Hamas' evil strategy of hiding its leadership, fighters, and weapons amid and beneath Palestinian civilians. Hamas started this war by showcasing its disregard for Israeli lives. Now, let me start there. There's a reason why I was covering this from day one. You guys know the ICC had investigations into Israeli war crimes, into Palestinians, and that inquiry started in 2021. So that since they had war crimes inquiries in the ICC over Israel that dated back years, that alone is shows the absurd logic that somehow Hamas started this war on October 7th. Because, like you said, this is I would say that October 7th was in response to Israel's longtime genocidal policies. But before we continue on with the rest of the topic, one thing I want to do, like I'll do usually whenever I have guests on for the first time, is do proper introductions. Dan, I want you to introduce yourself, like how you got involved with Midwestern Marx, your kind of ideology in general. And I was told that, and I heard about how you was retaliated against by Zionists because of your position over Palestine. You can talk about that as well if you want. But before we continue, I want to give you a proper introduction, so our audience know about your work. If you want to take that on, Danny.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, first off, October 7th was Nat Turner with the burner. October 7th was anti-colonial, to put it into 3 words, anti-colonial resistance. And those who decontextualize like AIPAC, that's because they come from a settler, racist, colonial ideology. And what's truly disturbing is how many people here in the United States are so confused. And that's why I just got back from Detroit and Dearborn. We had 2 different conferences out in Michigan. Dearborn is the epicenter of Arab migration here to the United States. We understand, to quote Manny Ness's new book, that migration is a byproduct of imperialism. So that's what makes Dearborn Dearborn. And here in New York City, we have Bay Ridge, Brooklyn, which is also another Palestinian diaspora epicenter. So, yeah, I've been in the movement for 3 decades now. My mother, who's sitting right next to me, want to say hi, Mom? Hi.
Hey, how you
My
doing?
mom's the one who, my mother raised me as an anti-imperialist. So from the time I was a teenager, I was reading books about Yasser Arafat and Layla Khaled and the PLO and all of the Palestinian resistance. So as you said, like on October 7th, back in October, it was very clear what Zionism and U.S. capitalism, because Zionism is nothing without their colonizing backers. And that's what all of this rhetoric and ideological confusion is about. When they try to conflate anti-Zionism with anti-Semitism, that reflects the needs of imperialism in the Middle East and why imperialism has chosen to weaponize the true history of Zionism, the true history of Jewish working class resistance, and the true history of Palestine. So as a professor for 18 years at John Jay College, I did everything to educate my students on how the struggle for Puerto Rican independence is connected to Palestine, and how the struggle of the Cuban people against this 65-year blockade is connected to Palestine, and how the struggle right now in Haiti. I was in Haiti a few months back. I returned in early February. I have a long relationship with the Haitian resistance, and that resistance right now is the U.S. carries out its 4th colonial invasion and occupation is connected to Palestinian resistance. So as a professor of international affairs and as a professor of Latin American and Caribbean studies, I never forgot about Palestine, because Palestine is a lightning rod, not just in the Arab world, but wherever there's resistance around the world. And for this reason, 6 weeks ago, I was fired after 18 years at John Jay College. The reasons they gave were my quote unquote language about Israel. And they continue to try to conflate the anti-Zionist struggle with anti-Semitism. That is a deep colonial lie. It's a genocidal lie. So we went out there to Dearborn with our close comrades from Infrared, Midwestern Marx, in Jackson Hinkle for a conference this past Friday. And then in Detroit, we had the National People's Palestine Conference as well. So 2 important events, which from my standpoint, I wouldn't see them as in contradiction necessarily. I would see these 2 different events as perhaps targeting different swaths of the U.S. Working class. And I think both events were successful. And I think we need maximum unity right now as this genocide stampedes forward with full support of Genocide Joe and potentially Trump if he's reelected on November 5th. The principal primary contradiction facing humanity is this genocide of a native people in Palestine. So for me, we can figure out all the different ideologies and differences, but for right now, I think unity has to be our watchword: anti-colonial unity, anti-Zionist, and anti-capitalist unity.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's my main priority, especially after everything we've seen. Especially after seeing the tent slaughters in Rafah, like our number one priority right now should be the destruction of Zionism, because it's through the destruction of Zionism that a giant part of the empire will then be dismantled. So right now, I think we should be all hands on deck in a unified coalition against Zionism itself, especially after their crimes that they committed.
And one thing I mentioned, I want to bring. There are a lot that you mentioned there regarding the retaliation, and this is a part of a long-term fascist plan to essentially make it illegal to dissent against Israel, where college campuses was forced to adopt the government's definition of anti-Semitism, where essentially anti-Semitism is criticism of Israel's foreign policy. That's where they had these trials. They're still doing these like congressional hearings when they're bringing these professors, these CEOs, these presidents of these universities, and they get them to pledge to not only go after students but professors for questioning the Israeli project, and that's where they got you from. And I want people to understand like this coordination between the government or institutions, the capitalist class, like the capitalist class who funded those the counter protesters to the pro-Palestinian protests. Like when you see the merging of the capitalist class, the government institutions and government action themselves with educational institutions, the merging of all this is what you see as the main driver of fascism. Right now, you're seeing people lose their jobs. The capitalist coordination with the Zionist project is something that people must focus on, and you've been a victim of that.
Yeah, that's very eloquently stated. And as Marxists, as students of socialism, it's important to understand the economic base always dictates the superstructure or the ideology, the dominant ideology in a society. We can go back to 1848 and Marx's classic formulation that the ruling ideology in every epoch are the ideas of the ruling class. So they try to dress it all up in this religious stuff, and this has nothing to do with Judaism. This has nothing to do with the history of Western civilization failing our Jewish sisters and brothers, because after all of the pogroms and the Holocaust, that was Western civilization. That was Germany and France and England and Tsarist Russia failing our Jewish sisters and brothers. But they have resorted to this Zionist ideology because they could see back in 1917 with Lord Balfour and his declaration that the quote unquote Arab world was the center for gas and oil production. So the forward thinking British imperialists and later on the US imperialists saw that if they could stick quote unquote Western gunboat smack dab dead in the middle of the Middle East, this would bring enormous profits and geopolitical advantages to them in the future. So that's what Zionism is. Zionism has nothing to do with religion and everything to do with colonialism, the ongoing colonization of the Middle East. The United States has destroyed Iraq. The US, through their Saudi proxy war, has destroyed Yemen. They have a 45-year war on the sovereignty of Iran. Look what they've done to Libya in 2011, NATO and the US. Look at the dirty war on Syria. Look at the ongoing war on Lebanese sovereignty. And all we ever hear in our echo chambers in the West is that the Palestinians are the bad guys and the Lebanese are the terrorists and Hezbollah this and that. And we got to go back to Dr. King and what Dr. Martin Luther King taught us at his famous Riverside address here in New York City. The greatest purveyor of violence in the entire world is our very own government. So, you know, maximum props to RBN for the work that you all have consistently been doing. Now, in terms of Zionism and their attack on our civil liberties, they've exposed how much hypocrisy exists here in the United States, because if the Constitution is supposed to protect our First Amendment rights, how come a professor like myself was fired? And many of my colleagues, all of whom our crime was an anti-colonial crime. We dared to stand up to power and speak the truth about this genocide and the 76 years of genocide. And that's the only reason they've ever given for firing us. Shailene Rodriguez was fired from NYU. My colleague, Professor Tomek, was fired from NYU and Hunter College. Another professor, colleague of mine, Lisa Hoffman Cordota, was fired from Hunter. And all of these students, how many students have been arrested, have been brutalized, have been suspended, how many graduations have been canceled. I mean, it's absolutely ridiculous. Everything to protect this colonial, racist, settler ideology. And shout out to all the students from my alma mater, Columbia University. Shout out to UCLA, where the Zionist mobs were particularly brutal. They made their first arrest today. It took them damn near almost a month. I mean, imagine if that was us. Imagine if we were attacking. I mean, Zionists are never peaceful, so I can't say they'd be peaceful. But in some hypothetical scenario, if it was us, from Midwestern Marx and other revolutionary organizations going and attacking students at UCLA and University of California, Irvine and Brown University and across the country, I mean, we'd be locked up within 5 minutes and brutalized, if not murdered. So it's amazing, like Malcolm taught us, this system relies not on democracy, but on hypocrisy.
Yeah, the cops was literally helping them assault protesters, and I covered this out. The cops were literally standing there as the UCLA protesters were being assaulted by the Zionists paid for counter protesters. It was funny that the mainstream media was talking about, oh my God, where are these pro-Palestinian protesters being funded? As you have literally Zionist Catholics. You literally had Steinfeld's wife that was funding the modern age Pinkertons, these mercenaries that was here to intimidate anyone who spoke out against Israeli genocide, which is why it's hilarious that people try to pretend you're anti-Semitic if you're against the foreign policy of Israel, if you're against Zionism, because Zionism is the greatest threat to the rights of Americans, also the rights of Jewish Americans. And then the main driver of Zionism comes from people like Nikki Haley, these evangelical Christians. And now we have this insane image. I want to get your reaction to this because Nikki Haley, who is not Jewish, and I think that was probably a tech issue there. So I'll just explain what's happening here. Nikki Haley, who is not Jewish, by the way, an evangelical Christian, went to Israel. You have all these people who are seeking power, people of the ruling class who are forced to, here we go, Danny's back, who are forced to make these journey to Israel to prove that they are sufficiently loyal. Nikki Haley, who already proved that she's loyal to Israel, just doing extra credit here. Trump appointed her to the UN, and it was widely reported how essentially her job at the UN was just to lobby and protect Israel. That was the only thing she was doing. Now she showed up at this IDF weapons site, and she's literally autographing these bombs, which finished them. And one of the things they keep saying it's not genocidal, it's not a genocide, because in order for it to be genocide, you must have intent. As you have United States lawmakers who approve of these weapons, Zionists who approve of these weapons, who literally advocate rhetoric like saying finish them. There's a famous Telegram channel in Israel that has over 150,000 members where they post dead images of Palestinian children and then they cheer and they make fun of them. So you literally have the genocidal intent here. So Danny, what's your reaction to this insane image? Nikki Haley going on signing finish them on Israeli bombs, knowing exactly what she's doing.
Yeah, the glorification of violence against oppressed people, against colonized people. Palestine is really the underdog within all of us. These are truly horrific images of white supremacy, of U.S. militarism on steroids. And it reminds us, everyone listening, we all have a huge responsibility. In the words of Ernesto Che Guevara, he said he had the most admiration for the comrades in the belly of the beast because we have the most gargantuan task before us. And that is breaking down this system, opposing this system, overthrowing this system from within the belly of the beast. It's not going to be easy. More and more people are joining us in the streets to say no to this wholesale slaughter of innocent life. How many of those bombs that the war criminal Nikki Haley and we saw Mike Pence over there signing these same genocidal weapons, and it shows you who they're truly loyal to. They're loyal to the weapons manufacturers. They're loyal to the U.S. Military-industrial complex, who even Dwight D. Eisenhower called the greatest threat to democracy within the U.S. So our responsibility is to keep reaching larger swaths of our class. That's why I think what Infrared and Jackson Hinkle are doing is unique. It's new, because there's different geographical realities in our country. You know, I'm a East Coast individual. You know, I'm in the Bronx, New York, and the way we talk out here is surely different than how they talk in certain sections of Minnesota and Michigan and in Southern Illinois. And it's only because of Midwestern Marx that they were able to, you know, educate me more on what people are seeing in the Midwest. And right now we're losing the informational war. We're losing the military war. We're losing the war, the genocidal war. So I think we need, like you said, we need all anti-imperialist hands, all anti-colonial hands on deck. We have to use every strategy. And sure, there's a place for comradely, constructive critiques. I don't think one organization can do it on their own. But I've certainly been opened up as a East Coaster. You know, they break my balls a lot and tell me I'm an East Coast coastal elite, and they say that sarcastically, but it's not something I'd be familiar with because I didn't grow up, you know, in Chicago or in Cleveland or in the surrounding areas. So I'm equally horrified. You know, I wrote a book on the genocide. It's called "This Is Genocide." And then the second section is 48 poems for Gaza, because anybody who's had their eyes open in the aftermath of October 7th could see this, the writing on the wall, that this was a genocide in motion. And those of us who are students of Israeli sociology, which is Zionist sociology, for 76 years, they've been teaching Israeli school children that they're superior to Palestinians. No different than Jim Crow Alabama and Mississippi, no different than the Dominican ruling class and how they teach that Haitians are inferior. So Zionism is an exclusionary, exterminationist, colonial ideology. It has to be destroyed. And when I say that the Zionists are the KKK of the Holy Land, that's not an exaggeration. That's rooted in sociological and historical fact. And then the House of Representatives comes and passes a law that we can't critique Zionism. And again, I bring you back to the needs of the U.S. ruling class in the Middle East. And that's why they're passing these ridiculous laws. To understand any law, whether it was the Rockefeller drug laws, one of the most racist laws here in New York's history, or the laws they're passing about Zionism, they completely reflect the needs of the ruling class of this country. And that's Marxism 101.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Your definition of Zionism and the way you explain it is so on point, and that's the mass mobilization we need to educate people on this Zionist Israeli project that has completely infiltrated our system, where it's like normalized for people to be retaliated against economically, like yourself, Danny, for speaking up against the Israeli project. We're even seeing in what I never seen before, where some evangelical Christians, a lot of people in white America who strongly supported the Israeli project, is starting to question it. That's why in this era right now, in this unique political situation, I think we need to be forming coalitions with these people who understand the Zionist infiltration of our system, who understand the threat that the Zionist ideology pose. Now, I want to organize this among an anti-colonial line. Not everyone is necessarily anti-colonial, but people need to understand, and there are a lot of people who have problems with the way I do things, because the biggest criticism that I still get to this day is that I like to talk to people, I guess. That, oh, you had Jackson on, you had Jimmy on, you had this person on. Like, I'm from the Midwest, guys. Like, there are a lot of these coastal elites. Speaking of coastal elites, there are a lot of these coastal elites. And I noticed that the people who criticize me for talking to people who are socially conservative, who may be libertarian, Lion Cosgrove was just on the show, he's a libertarian. I noticed these people who have these like very strict guidelines on who we can talk to and who we can organize with. I always almost like look at their location as like a side project, and every time it's always New York, California, some Twitter user from New York and California condemning the red, brown, and lines. You organize it with conservative, you organize it with Midwestern Marx. And I'm like, yeah, you guys have a blue ocean. You guys are surrounded by shit libs. So, and for some reason, you guys think it's worthwhile to organize with other shit libs. But as someone who lives in the Midwest, who's someone who's surrounded by conservative and people who are socially conservative, we got to realize that we need to organize with people who got our material interest in mind, who have the threat of the empire in mind. So in general, that's my vague overall thoughts about Hinkle, Haas, and anyone else who people may have disagreements on. When you look at Marxists, when you look at communists, when you look at anti-imperialists around the world, a lot of them are socially conservative. A lot of them have beliefs that we wouldn't agree with. What a lot of people don't realize is that when you look at socialists and communists, and then I'll pass to you for your thoughts, but when you look at socialists in Brazil, for example, the one who formed the coalition to elect Lula, they are very socially conservative. They are evangelicals. There's a big evangelical wing of Lula support. When you look at in Southeast Asia, where there are a lot of communists and socialists, there are a lot of socially conservative people there. So people need to understand in America, they have a very liberalized idea about what Marxism and what communism really is. What we need to be doing is organizing with people who share our material, share our will to improve our material conditions, who have our class, who have class solidarity with us, and solidarity means the ability to check each other. Because if we're not allowed to check each other, we're not allowed to improve each other. That is not solidarity. That's unity. So I'm for the giant coalition where we have solidarity with each other, where we're hammering things together and getting things right. That is there's a lot to sum up there. That's my general summation. Danny, anything you want to add on to this? And we got a few quick things we can cover. We won't be on for too much longer. We have a few more quick things we want to cover. Anything you want to add before we move on, Danny?
Yeah, I think the way you laid it out was super eloquent. And a revolutionary is always evolving. And what you just laid out, how the Midwest is socially conservative, and that's something that I couldn't have heard 7 years ago, the way I can hear you right now. And that's thanks to the Noah's class at the Midwestern Marx Institute. We have ongoing classes on Marxism, Leninism, and Noah's teaching the basics class now. And Carlos will be teaching Marxist fundamentals of philosophy coming up. I taught a course, Educate Against Genocide, beginning back in October, so that we could make plain for our class that this was a genocide in motion since October and since 1948. So it's only because I've been able to expand my horizons and follow you all and participate with Midwestern Marx that I could realize that the type of ideological formation that I've received, the training that I received since 1994 and 1995 was perhaps correct for the specific geo-ideological reality of where I'm from. But when I spent that time in the Midwest, and I just returned from the Midwest yesterday, I just came back from Dearborn, Michigan, in Detroit, I was opened up to so much. And that's what allowed me to have this, this more unified, all-encompassing view. So I'm hoping that revolutionaries here on the East Coast can continue to challenge themselves and resynthesize and take a deeper look at how we can all work together. In terms of Lula and Lula's base, it's interesting you raised that. I was actually there in Rio de Janeiro and in Sao Paulo. I was in Brazil for Lula's victory about almost 2 years ago. In October, it'll be 2 years. And I was at an evangelical church because Bolsonaro, the Trump of the tropics, as he was called, Bolsonaro was really able to manipulate most of the evangelical and Christian vote. And Lula understood, as a popular statesman, as a popular union leader from the 70s and 80s, that he had to go to the people. And the evangelical church has been growing like crazy because of people's alienation in the favelas of Rio and the ghettos of Sao Paulo. And the evangelical phenomenon is not just in Texas or the Midwest, it's across South America. So how do we adapt as Marxists, Leninists? We have to know how to spin on a dime at any point that we think we have it all figured out. that's the moment that we're turning our back on our class. So that day that Lula went to speak to the evangelical base in Rio de Janeiro, I covered that. I was there. And I'm constantly learning from the Lulas and the Nicolas Maduros and the Evo Moraleses and all the different revolutionaries. For me, it was an incredible honor to be mentored by the Haitian revolutionaries, the Dominican revolutionaries, the Cubans. And at Midwestern Marx, we try to combine our responsibility to wage the class struggle wherever we are, whether that's in Southern Florida, which is a different reality than the Bronx, New York, and it's different than the West Coast. Well, there's different geopolitical realities country to country. So we should constantly be learning from one another and keep it focused on who the real enemy is. My enemy is not another tendency on the left. Despite what ideological differences might exist, I would say that's a secondary or tertiary contradiction. And I agree with you. Like Mao wrote that whole piece on liberalism. If we can't critique one another, comrade to comrade, man to man, woman to woman, then it's like the Sandinistas say, I'm going to praise you behind your back and I'm going to gossip right to your face. Because if we have differences, we can work them out in a comradely fashion.